alien queen observed a human servant comfort her crippled daughter, and in that moment, everything changed. The grand palace of Zitharon was carved into the living crystal of the mountain, its jagged spires gleaming beneath the triple suns. Within its glittering halls, silence was enforced by ritual and law. Servants moved like shadows, heads bowed, and words were few. At the center of this empire sat Queen Aravax, the Iron Mother, ruler of 1,000 systems. To most of her subjects, she was untouchable, an empress of power and terror. Yet in the innermost chamber of her palace, there was one truth that no one but the closest attendants knew. Her youngest daughter, Princess Zyra, had been born with a twisted spine. Among the proud and battle-born Zithari, strength was everything. To be weak was a curse, and to be crippled was unthinkable. The princess was kept hidden, cloaked in veils and shadows, shielded from the eyes of the empire. Her laughter, when it came, was soft and private, reserved for the few caretakers allowed near her chambers. And yet, her spirit burned fiercely despite her frailty. One of those caretakers was a human servant named Elias Kale. The beginning, a human in the court of Titans. Humans were rare in Zitharon. Once, they had been enemies, fierce warriors resisting the Empire's expansion. But when Earth fell under Zithari dominion, humans were absorbed into the Empire's machinery, some as workers, others as soldiers, and a few as servants to the nobility. Elias had been chosen for palace duty because of his unusual calm, his refusal to break under the cruel tests of loyalty. He was assigned to the young princess almost by accident, at first only to carry supplies and arrange her chamber. But Zyra had noticed him. While most Zithari attendants treated her like a fragile relic, Elias had looked her in the eyes as though she were not a shameful secret but a person. Their bond had grown from small moments, his gentle humor, the way he helped her move from bed to chair without making her feel lesser, the stories he told of Earth's forests and oceans. One evening, after a long day of silence in the palace, Zyra asked him softly, "Do you ever dance, Elias?" The question startled him. Among the Zithari, dancing was not a pastime. It was ritualized combat, an expression of strength and grace. "I used to," he admitted, "at festivals back home." Before, he trailed off, remembering Earth's conquest, the smoke and ash. Her luminous eyes glimmered with curiosity. "Show me." He laughed. "I'd look like a fool." But she insisted. And so, in the hidden chamber of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, Elias taught the princess to sway with the rhythm of a song only he remembered. He took her hands, careful with her twisted frame, and moved slowly, humming a tune from Earth. She laughed, breathless, not caring that her movements were halting, that her steps faltered. It was then, unseen by them, that Queen Aravax entered. The middle, a queen's revelation. The queen had not intended to watch. She had come to see her daughter, to remind herself of the weakness she could never acknowledge publicly. But what she saw instead was the human, her servant, holding the princess's fragile hands, spinning her gently in a clumsy but heartfelt dance. At first, Aravax's warrior's blood boiled. How dared this human touch royal flesh? How dared he reduce Zithari dignity to a mockery of human ritual? She nearly strode in to crush him with her own claws. But then Zyra laughed. It was not the brittle, hidden laugh the queen was accustomed to hearing from her daughter. It was full, radiant, alive. Aravax froze in the shadows, her sharp breath caught in her throat. In all her years of ruling, commanding fleets, and conquering worlds, she had never heard her daughter sound so free. Something twisted in the queen's chest. She thought of all the generals who had saluted her victories, of the citizens who knelt in fear. None of it had touched her the way this sound did. The laughter of her broken child, unguarded and whole. For weeks afterward, Aravax watched secretly. She saw how Elias read stories aloud when Zyra's pain grew too sharp, how he carried her to the garden so she could feel the suns on her face, how he never once looked at her as an embarrassment. The queen's counselors had often whispered that weakness should be erased, that the princess should vanish quietly to preserve the empire's honor. But here was a human, a supposed inferior being, treating her daughter with more dignity than her own kind. Aravax found herself torn between rage and awe. The turning point, a forbidden banquet. The shift came during the Feast of Conquest, when nobles from across the empire filled the crystal halls. The queen's daughters were paraded before the court, radiant in their jeweled armor. But Zyra, as always, remained hidden. That night, however, Aravax made an unthinkable decision. Bring her, she ordered Elias in secret. The human's eyes widened. Your Majesty, if the court sees. They will see what I command them to see, Aravax snapped. Yet her tone softened, and you will be at her side. And so, for the first time, Princess Zyra appeared at a royal feast. Veiled and trembling, she leaned on Elias's arm as they entered the hall. Gasps rippled through the nobles. Some sneered. Others whispered of weakness. But then, when the music began, Zyra looked up at Elias with pleading eyes. He hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. Together, they began to dance, not the ritualized combat of the Zithari, but the simple swaying rhythm of earth. The hall fell silent. Whispers turned to awe as they watched the crippled princess smile, her human partner guiding her with tenderness no warrior's training could match. Even the hardened nobles could not deny the sight's strange power. And on the throne, Queen Aravax watched with tears she would never admit to shedding. For in that moment, she saw not shame, not weakness, but a strength her empire had long forgotten, the strength to love, to find joy even in brokenness. The ending, the queen's choice. When the music ended, silence hung heavy. A noble dared to speak, spitting venom. This is disgraceful. A crippled heir, and dancing with a servant? It shames the empire. Every eye turned to the queen. Aravax rose, her towering frame casting shadows across the hall. She descended the steps slowly, each motion deliberate, until she stood before her daughter and the human. Her claws rested on Elias's shoulder. He expected death, but instead, she declared in a voice that shook the chamber, "This is my daughter. She is Zithari. She is mine, and she will be hidden no longer." Gasps echoed. The nobles trembled. None dared challenge her. Then the queen did the unthinkable. She reached down and lifted Zyra into her arms, cradling her before the empire. Strength is not the absence of scars. It is the fire that endures despite them. Tonight, you will all remember this. Elias bowed, trembling, realizing he had witnessed a transformation not only of a princess, but of an empire. From that day forward, whispers of weakness turned into songs of courage. The crippled princess became a symbol of hidden strength, and the human servant who had dared to dance with her was no longer seen as a slave, but as a guardian. And in the heart of the Iron Mother herself, something had changed forever.